Part 79. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 781. Seeing Su Buling coming over, Chen Xining's heart tightened and she turned around and said, "Father, he just woke up, you." Chen Xining originally wanted to wait until some time later, but the Ziliang army had already arrived at the city. No one in South Vietnam except her father could take charge of the overall situation at this time. If it continued, there might be some trouble in the capital. Chen Xining hesitated for a moment, but without saying anything more, she stood up and walked out of the dormitory silently. Chen Jin is not a mediocre king. On the contrary, before the incident, he was a wise king with excellent reputation. If not, he would not be able to command the tribes of Baiyu. When Chen Jin saw Su Buling's tone and his daughter's reaction, the instinct of a person in power already made him feel something was wrong. He sat up from the hospital bed with some difficulty, regained the dignity that a monarch should have, raised his hand to motion to the seat next to him, and said hoarsely, "Sit down." "Who are you?" Su Buling sat down next to the hospital bed with a calm expression. "The eldest son of King Dao Su, I promise not to order you." Chen Jin frowned. As the monarch of South Vietnam, it was impossible not to know who King Su was. He turned his head and glanced at the bedroom, and after confirming that it was his imperial city and not a house in Chang'an City, he said, "It seems that Gu has been unconscious for a long time. His Royal Highness, are you visiting Baiyu, or are you bringing troops?" In fact, when Chen Jin asked this question, he already had some guesses in his mind. Chen Jin knew the relationship between Dao Emperor Songji and King Su. As long as Songji was on the throne, it would never be possible to send Prince Su's son, who was far away in the northwest, on an envoy to the capital of South Vietnam. Even if he sent King Su, he would not pay attention. Prince Su's son appeared in Yangzhou City. The only possibility was that Dao used troops to attack South Vietnam and ask Su Buling to take command and fight over directly. Despite this speculation, Chen Jin was unwilling to believe this result. After all, if this was true, South Vietnam was already at the point of life and death. He just slept for a long time. Why did the sky fall when he woke up? Su Buling sat next to the hospital bed, his expression was not arrogant, and he said calmly, "Your Majesty, there is no need to panic. Although I brought troops here, my original intention was not to destroy the Chen family. On the contrary, the Chen family pays tribute to me every year and we have excellent relations with each other. I brought troops here to help your Majesty relieve the siege." Chen Jin had been away from the court for so long that she had no idea what was going on outside. But if Dao can fight over, there will definitely be a lot of chaos in the court. He looked at Su Buling and nodded. "Your Highness, why do you say this?" Su Buling raised his finger and pointed at the portrait next to him. Concubine Zhou's biological father Angguo Gongzhou Qin was a remnant of the Beikong Valley in the Jiazi period. His real name was Shang Guanqin He. He settled in Lingshan County incognito since he was a child. 20 years ago, he offered his beauty to win the favor of His Majesty, and thus he rose to prominence and was granted a title. After your Majesty gave birth to Chenju, he secretly poisoned Queen Song and the eldest son of the king, causing His Majesty to go crazy and lose his mind. After that, he supported Chenju to take power and gradually took control of the court in recent years. Secretly recruited troops and developed poisons in an attempt to invade our Cheoku land. After I learned the news, I came to help your Majesty eradicate the traitors and found the antidote in him, so that your Majesty could regain his consciousness. If I don't come, Chen, the clan will be exterminated in less than 2 years. Chen Jin frowned and looked at the portrait on the wall. Only Chen Jin himself knew how painful it was after going crazy. He didn't believe that drinking all day long would lead to him becoming what he is now. As the saying goes, whoever benefits the most is the murderer. When Wang's eldest son died and he fell into a coma, the person who benefited the most was definitely his second son, Chen Ju. But Chen Jing couldn't accept this fact. It was heartless for a father and son in an imperial family to fight each other, not to mention that this happened to his most beloved son. The queen and the eldest son have died of illness. The throne will definitely belong to Chen Ju in the future. Why should he attack Gu again? Su Buling shook his head. So Zhou Qin is in charge of everything. Your Majesty is here, and Zhou Qin cannot control the court. As for whether Chen Ju knows about it, Your Majesty should ask him himself. Chen Jin took a deep breath, put aside his distracting thoughts, and then looked out the window. Where are His Royal Highness's troops and horses? We can cross Teapot Ridge tonight. Chen Jin's eyelids twitched obviously and he looked at Su Buling. We're already at the doorstep, what else is there to talk about? Although South Vietnam is loose, the Chen family has ruled here for hundreds of years and is regarded as orthodox by the Biao tribes. Our court also regards South Vietnam as a country of brothers. This trip will help His Majesty relieve the siege. Chen Jin raised his hand. Why do you need to say these embarrassing words? If His Royal Highness is really helping Gu to rescue the siege, he should go back now. Su Buling chuckled lightly. The sage Yun Shuntian survives, and it is said that the people are the most noble, the country is the second, and the king is the least. The world has become unified, and rash wars will not only hurt the people far-reaching, but also the Chen family is in the war. I am afraid that it will be difficult to survive in the future. I came here today to advise Your Majesty to consider the people of South Vietnam and act within your ability. Chen Jin didn't know much about the situation outside, but Su Buling could come to him, which meant that Chen was already a piece of fish on the chopping board. He said calmly, "Destroy my Chen family, and you will gain the land of the 4 southern states at most. Once the Chen family is destroyed, the Biao tribes will immediately disintegrate and do their own thing. You just can't wipe them out one by one. You want to lead the Biao tribes to accept the land and become vassals. What are you talking about? The people are valued and the king is valued." Su Buling's expression did not change. "Your Majesty, if you want to understand it this way, that's fine." Chen Jin looked directly into Su Buling's eyes. "I would rather have broken jade than complete tiles. If Guruo doesn't agree, what can you do?" Su Buling stood up and shook his head. "Clearing the Biao tribes will only result in more deaths. It's not that I can't do it. If I really do this, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, the Chen family will definitely be expelled. Your Majesty has been away from the court for too long. It's not too late to take a rest for 2 days to see the situation in the world and then consider this issue. I will wait for Your Majesty's reply outside the city. Goodbye." After saying this, Su Buling raised his hand and saluted, then turned and walked out of the bedroom. The empty bedroom became quiet, and the air was filled with a faint smell of medicine. "Get red envelope cash or point red envelopes have been issued to your account. Follow the WeChat public account book Friends Base Camp to receive it." Chen Jin sat on the sickbed, and his face, which looked like a withered bone, showed discomfort and fatigue at this time. After taking a few deep breaths, he supported the couch and stood up. He hadn't walked for too long, and his legs were almost unstable. After years of being in a daze, he woke up from a dream, as if he had walked out of a coffin. Chen Jin looked up at the portrait on the wall, and after a moment, he staggered to the door of the bedroom, leaning on the threshold to look at the thunder and rain outside. His eyes were dazed, probably thinking about what had happened in the past few years. Su Buling had already left, and Chen Sining was still standing at the door waiting. Seeing Chen Jin coming out, she hurried over and said nervously, "Father, you." Chen Jin raised his hand and looked at his daughter beside him, but at this time he couldn't say the words of a close relative, but just said slowly, "Sining, tell your father what happened in the past few years, and what happened in Daewoo, tell him in detail." Chen Si Ning wanted to help Chen Jin into the house to sit, but Chen Jin refused. He had been lying on the sickbed for too long, and would rather stand under the eaves and blow the cold wind than go back to lie down. Seeing this, Chen Si Ning had no choice but to give up and began to sort out the big and small things that happened after Chen Jin went crazy. It's the end of the volume. The update may be slow in the next 2 days. After finishing this volume and writing the outline of the next volume, I will speed up the update. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 782. Outside the window, the night rain continued, and the light in the pavilion was dim. In the side room of the inn on the street, Ning Qingyi sat at the table, wiping the snow-white sword, looking at the 4 words acting without orders on it, slightly absent-minded, with thin lips and a delicate face with a bit of coldness. Under the candlelight, she looked like a female knight who drunk and looked at the sword by lamplight. Zhongli Chuchu sat sideways at the window, looking at the street in the distance, waiting for Su Buling, who was already her husband, to come back. Her red embroidered shoes kicked the hem of her skirt, causing ripples. Born in the western regions, her figure was already seductive. Sitting sideways like this, from the waist to the tip of the shoe, she outlined a delicate and graceful curve, which was in great contrast with the cold temperament of Ning Qingyi, just like a ball of fire burning next to an iceberg. The two were once considered close friends in the rivers and lakes, but since Chuchu took a step further, their relationship was obviously a bit awkward. Qingyi is still a virgin. Chuchu can't talk about dirty talk between women like the 2 masters next door, but if she talks about serious things, Chuchu is newly married, and her mind is full of Su Buling bullying her, so she can't be serious at all. There was silence for a moment. Su Buling hadn't come back yet. Zhongli Chuchu felt that it was not good to leave Qingyi aside, and it was impossible to expect Qingyi, who was a taciturn person, to speak first, so she jumped down from the window and sat down across the table. Chuchu, Juju, and Yuhi have all consummated their marriages, leaving Qingyi alone as a virgin, and it must be awkward for them to get along with each other, especially at night, when Qingyi was watching from the side, which made her feel like everyone was having a meal, and Qingyi was just watching from the side, feeling a little embarrassed, and this problem had to be solved. Zhongli Chuchu thought for a while and asked, Qingyi, when will you and Su Buling be married? Ning Qingyi paused in wiping his sword. There was no outsider in the room, only a good friend of the same age, so there was nothing to be shy about. She thought for a while and said. Manzi said that when she gets married, her father must be there. Sigh. Zhongli Chuchu had heard of Qingyi's life experience and understood what Qingyi meant. If there was a close relative by her side, which woman in the world would be willing to marry alone? She thought for a while. Su Buling's army has arrived outside the city, and the matter of Nanyu has been settled. When spring comes, we should be able to go to Jiangnan to finish the war. Dainglu is rebelling in Jiangnan, and we will definitely meet him at that time. It just so happens that Manzi's father is also there. Ning Qingyi still held a hostile attitude towards Li Hanzheng. He didn't want to talk about this kind of thing, so he shook his head. Let's talk about it later. Seeing this, Zhongli Chuchu nodded gently and said no more. She looked Qingyi up and down, pondered for a moment, and suddenly remembered something, and said with a slightly red face. Qingyi, actually, it seems that you can do that without consummating the marriage. I saw Master, well, she used her tail first, and then from the back. Ning Qingyi naturally understood what Chuchu was talking about. She had seen the scene of Master Tail doing something crazy, and when Master and Juju were arguing, she also mentioned that her master dared to do anything. From behind. Ning Qingyi's face changed slightly, and she instinctively sat up a little straighter, covered her buttocks, and frowned. Chuchu, what are you talking about? Why don't you go by yourself? Zhongli Chuchu didn't dare to play so much, and her eyes flickered and looked away. I, I saw that you were bored next to me, so I wanted you to feel a little involved. In fact, I think Master is very happy, so it shouldn't hurt. Shouldn't hurt? Ning Qingyi couldn't say anything more. She looked at the sky and saw that it was getting late, so she wanted to put away her sword and rest. Just for safety reasons, only 3 rooms were opened. She should sleep in the same room with Master. Master was arguing with Zhongli, and it would take a while for the quarrel to end. She thought for a moment and asked, "Chuchu, where will Su Buling sleep tonight?" Zhongli Chuchu was too embarrassed to continue and smiled. "I don't know, anyway, he can't sleep in his own room." Ning Qingyi thought about it and it was true. When Su Buling came back at night, he would either sleep in her and Master's room, or in Chuchu and Jiju's room. Even if the inn's bed couldn't accommodate 5 people, Su Buling would come to sleep together, and she would definitely be bullied at night. Ning Qingyi had already compromised, but she hadn't taken the last step after all. Last time, when 5 people were messing around in the Miao village, she was watching stupidly and was teased by Master and Jiju. That weird feeling was not pleasant at all, and she didn't want to experience it again anyway. Ning Qingyi thought about it. Since she couldn't hide anywhere, she would do the opposite. Su Buling wouldn't sleep in her room anyway, so she would sleep in Su Buling's room. If Su Buling came to bully her after visiting her, she would have nothing to say. She couldn't sleep outside. Thinking of this, Ning Qingyi put away his sword and stood up and said, "I'm going back to my room. You should rest early. By the way, don't tell Su Buling about that. If he really wants to, I will drag you away." Zhongli Chuchu had a strange expression on her face. She naturally nodded and promised not to say anything. She stood up and sent Ning Qingyi out of the room. Ning Qingyi walked into the corridor and passed by Ning Yuhi's room. She didn't go in, but came directly to the room of Su Buling and Yang. Su Buling went to the imperial city with Chen Si Ning to do business. For safety reasons, he didn't bring anyone with him. Yang stayed in the room alone. At this moment, on the bed in the room, Nightingale was lying flat on the quilt with a facial mask on her face, warming the bed and conscientiously performing her duties as a personal maid. The little sparrow was also in the room. The 2 little snakes were sent away. The little sparrow was obviously in a good mood. He walked on the flat quilt with a step that didn't recognize his relatives. He chirped, as if he was giving a lecture, saying something like, "Little Nightingale, this won't happen again. If you like the little snakes more than me, I won't sleep with you." The nightingale had no snakes to play with, so naturally he put all his love into the little sparrow. He took the pine nuts, peeled one from time to time, and put it into the little sparrow's mouth. Seeing Ning Qingyi open the door and walk in, Nightingale turned her head slightly puzzled. "Little sister Ning, is there something wrong?" Ning Qingyi put down her sword, walked to the bed, and smiled, "No problem, I'll sleep here today, is it okay?" Nightingale looked a little strange, raised her eyes and looked behind Ning Qingyi, thought about it, and moved a little inside. "Well, I don't mind." Ning Qingyi blinked, a little puzzled, followed Nightingale's gaze and looked back, and her expression froze. On the other side of the room, Su Buling, with his upper body naked, poked his head out from behind the screen, and was wiping his hair with a towel. It was obvious that he had just returned and was changing his clothes that were wet by the rain. Seeing Ning Qingyi suddenly come over to sleep, Su Buling's eyes were obviously a little surprised, and he looked up and down. "Qingyi, you, come here to eat alone." Ning Qingyi stared with surprise, "Why are you here?" Su Buling came out from behind the screen, smiling, and hugged Qingyi's shoulders. "This is my room, why can't I be here? Could it be that you thought I didn't come back and planned to give me a surprise? That's really thoughtful." While speaking, Su Buling picked up Ning Qingyi horizontally, put her on the quilt, and raised his hand to take off the embroidered shoes. Ning Qingyi didn't expect to hide from Su Buling and hide in the muzzle of a gun. Now she couldn't get rid of it even if she jumped into Liujiang. She struggled and tried her best to explain. "I'm not looking for you, Wu Wu." Before she finished speaking, her mouth was blocked. After that, she felt dizzy and didn't know where she was. After Su Buling skillfully put Qingyi down, he held Qingyi and came to Chuchu's room again. Zhongli Chuchu was sitting at the table, still thinking about getting Qingyi involved. Seeing Su Buling running in with Ning Qingyi in his arms, he stood up quickly. "Husband, Qingyi, didn't you go to bed?" "Why?" Ning Qingyi's eyes were blurry, and he didn't know what he was doing. He turned to Chuchu dizzily. Maybe the fear in his heart awakened some of his consciousness, and he said, "Chuchu, don't talk about what happened just now, otherwise I..." He was trying to cover up his mistake. Su Buling frowned, closed the door with his shoes, walked up to Chuchu, and asked curiously, "Chuchu, what happened just now?" Zhongli Chuchu stared at the pig teammate in Su Buling's arms with her beautiful green eyes, with an embarrassed expression, and he was hesitant to speak. Su Buling could tell from Chuchu's expression that it was something that a girl couldn't talk about. He curled his lips and turned to the bed. "Don't worry, talk slowly, there's plenty of time." Zhongli Chuchu pursed her lips, hesitated, raised her hand to close the window, bolted the door, and then walked to Su Buling and whispered, "Nothing, I just want to..." "Chuchu, you, Wu. Go ahead, cover her mouth." The wind and rain continued inside and outside the house, the lights burned out at some point, and the whispers continued until dawn. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 783. Although Cha Yuling was heavily armed, the Nanyu soldiers had lost all their fighting spirit in the face of a dam-breaking defeat. They were waiting for a verdict, waiting for the moment when the rainstorm stopped and the Ziliang army launched a general attack. The army led by Yang Zunyi camped outside Cha Yuling. They could attack the city in the rain, but when they reached this place, the Chen family of Nanyu had no way out and there was no need to fight anymore. They only needed to block all the roads where reinforcements might appear. The rest was to wait for the Nanyu court to figure it out and give an answer that everyone could accept. In Yangzhou City, all the princes and nobles who could escape had already fled. Half of those who did not escape were loyal and brave men who lived and died with the country, and half were people whose roots were in Yangzhou and could not leave at all. The Ziliang army did not break the city directly in one go, but no one in Yangzhou City could relax their tense heartstrings. Because now Yangzhou City has become the New Year's pig of the Ziliang army, the knife is in their hands, and it is only a matter of time before it is chopped off. It is just a matter of dying a few days earlier or later. In recent years, the second Prince Chenju, who has been the regent, has become a drunkard, and Zhou Qin, who is acting as the prime minister, has disappeared. There is no one to make decisions, so what changes can be expected? Originally, the ministers in the court of Nanyu had already despaired, and they were ready to hang themselves outside the gate when the city was broken. Unexpectedly, the next day, an astonishing news came from the palace that the monarch of Nanyu, Chen Jin, had woken up after being crazy for several years. At first, the court officials of Nanyu did not believe it, until they ran to the court non-stop and saw the skinny Chen Jin sitting steadily on the throne. They were really relieved. It has come to this point. Chen Jin must be powerless to save the situation even if he wakes up, and he can't drive back the overwhelming Ziliang army. But Chen Jin was the ruler of a country and the leader of Nanyu. At this critical moment, at least he could make the decision. As long as the Ziliang army outside could agree to cede land, pay compensation, marry, and pay tribute, Chen Jing could make the decision. It was better than not having anyone to negotiate with the Ziliang army. As Chen Jin woke up, the Nanya court, which was about to collapse, regained some vitality. The officials who stayed in Yangzhou city worked frantically and discussed countermeasures all night long. After telling Chen Jin all the big and small things that happened in recent years, the third princess Chen Xining had done everything she could. As a woman, she couldn't get involved in political affairs. She might be the most idle person in the imperial city at present. After staying in Fuan Palace for a day, she left the palace alone and came to Chaohuang Street. The heavy rain never stopped, as if the sky was crying, paying tribute to the city that had been passed down in the hands of the Chen family for hundreds of years in advance. Chen Xining sat in the carriage, looking at the long street that was much more desolate. Her peach blossom eyes, which seemed to be drunk, were no longer as charming as before, and only left a complexity that she didn't know where to start. As the eldest princess of the Chen family, Chen Xining hated evil and loved the people like her own children. Since she could remember, she had been trying to make South Vietnam better with her own meager strength. Even if there were many unsatisfactory aspects of South Vietnam, she believed that it would get better one day. But everything came so suddenly, as if in the blink of an eye, the 1,000-story building collapsed in front of her. After this battle, the decline of the Chen family was almost doomed. All the efforts made by the ancestors to establish the South Vietnam would be in vain, and there might not even be a chance to make a comeback in the future. Even if South Vietnam was still there, the master would no longer be surnamed Chen. It was obviously the powerful Dayo and the unstoppable Su family army that caused all this. But Chen Xining couldn't be cruel to Su Buling at this time. Without Su Buling, the truth about the cause of death of her mother and brother would never be found out, and her father would be crazy all his life until he died of illness after Chen Ju consolidated his power. And she might regard Zhou Qin, the Duke of Angguo, who almost killed her whole family, as a loyal pillar of the court, and Chen Ju, who was inseparable from all this, as her only brother. If that were the case, Chen Xining would rather the South Vietnam was gone, and she would rather burn down the foundation laid by her ancestors than let the blood feud of the cuckoo occupying the magpie's nest in vain. And Su Buling was right. The world's situation had reached this point. The corrupt rule of South Vietnam for nearly 20 years had given Dayo an opportunity. With the gap between the two countries, no matter who was sent, the fate of South Vietnam would be the same. Su Buling at least treated the people as human beings, and did not massacre the city to establish his authority or condone the soldiers to plunder. Otherwise, the Yangzhou city she saw would be a different scene. But it is not realistic to ask Chen Xining to thank Su Buling. Her country was about to be destroyed, so she was grateful to the enemy for showing mercy and leaving her body intact. Isn't that a brain problem? However, although Chen Xining had no good feelings towards Su Buletinling on the level of countries, she was still very grateful to Su Buletinling on a personal level. Su Buletinling destroyed the 100 Insects Valley, killed Zhou Qin, and helped her cure her father. This kindness could not be erased. The carriage went on Chaohuang Street for a while and arrived at the familiar alley again. Chen Xining raised her eyes and looked at the street. She thought that she would not meet the person she wanted to meet if she just came out for a walk, but she didn't expect to see a familiar scene again. It was also rainy. A handsome man in a white robe stood at the alley with an oil paper umbrella. His face was cold and smiling, and he was also looking at her. Chen Xining's eyes lit up slightly, and she tilted her head and said, "Stop the car." When she looked again, there was no one at the alley. The carriage stopped at the street. Chen Xining got off, shielded the rain with her hands, and trotted into the alley. It was still the same eaves as last time. Su Buling put away his umbrella and stood with his hands behind his back, watching the occasional lightning flashing across the sky, waiting quietly. Tap tap tap. Chen Xining trotted through the alleyway and came under the same roof. She turned her head and glanced a few times, and asked curiously. Mr. Su, why are you still in the city? Why are you here waiting for me? The two little snakes smelled Su Buling's scent and came out of Chen Xining's sleeves. They looked at Su Buling, opened their mouths and swayed, looking like they were waiting for food. They obviously left Zhongli. Jeju was so greedy. Su Buling took out two small balls from his sleeves, put them into Ah Ching and Ah Bai's mouths, and said calmly. Waiting for your father's reply, I am afraid that your father will run away, so I will send people to keep an eye on the area around the imperial city. I will know as soon as you leave the city. This answer is obviously a bit unromantic and quite unpleasant. Chen Xining blinked, stood up a little straighter, and looked at the sky. Although these days are quite chaotic, with troops approaching the city will have to change its name in a few days, but I still thank you first. In any case, it would be better for South Vietnam to end in the hands of my father, than to be destroyed by rebellious ministers and traitors. I don't know if this sentence is a thank you or a complaint. Su Buling shook his head and said, don't be so pessimistic. The centipede insect is dead but not stiff. The Chen family has been working in South Vietnam for hundreds of years. From bio tribes to overseas countries, it has deep roots. Not everyone can replace it. It's just that we are restricted by the Central Plains and cannot develop maritime transportation. Your father is a sensible man. As long as he doesn't get into trouble, the Chen family will still be the Chen family, but the areas they rule are different. Chen Xining was silent for a moment. Originally, I was in charge of my own affairs, but in the future I will become a long-term worker for you. Who do you think can be happy? Su Buling spread his hands slightly, at least it's better than nothing. Chen Xining sighed and didn't say much about things that she couldn't change. Instead, she said. When my father gives you an answer, you are going to leave South Vietnam, right? Where are you going? Su Buling thought for a while. It's boring to fight against Jiangnan and Northern Qi. When you are done with your work, you can go home in peace to have a wife and raise children. Chen Xining nodded. Actually, I think you should not be born in the emperor's family, but in the Jianghu. The way you act chivalrously and eliminate harm for the people is much more interesting than the way you are now aggressively relying on military power. If you were just a human being in order to find my relatives and friends, I might follow you around and hunt down gangsters all over South Vietnam. It makes me excited to think about it. Yeah, God doesn't do what people want. Su Buring smiled. In fact, he quite liked that kind of life, but it was a pity that he was not born to belong to the world. The two of them said nothing, and stood together for a long time looking at the rain curtain outside the eaves. Chen Xining didn't know why she was standing here. She had said everything she needed to say, and it seemed that there was no point in standing. But what could she do if she went back? The rain continued outside the eaves, and no matter how long it took, the little sparrow flew over despite the heavy rain and landed on the wall. Su Buling frowned, left the umbrella behind, and walked into the rain. Farewell. Goodbye. Chen Xining responded softly, looked at the umbrella leaning against the wall, and when she looked up again, Su Buling had disappeared. She looked at the dark clouds and heavy rain that seemed to be pressing above her head. After a long time, she sighed softly. In the rain, Su Buling took the little sparrow up and down between the buildings, and soon arrived at the small inn where he stayed. The guests of the palace were patrolling below the inn. Ning Yu stood at the window and looked out. When he saw Su Buling, he waved quickly. Su Buling entered the room through the window and asked. Master, what's wrong? Ning Yu's eyes were slightly anxious. Siener sent a letter, saying that Zioan was sick, and asked Jeju to go back quickly and take a look. If you can find time, you can go back too. The letter didn't say anything about illness, nor did she say anything about it. Tell me how it goes. Kui Zioan was life-saving to Ning Yu. Although the two did not have a close friendship, Ningyu he always remembered the kindness from back then. At this time, he was obviously a little worried about something happening to the frail and sick Xiaoan. Nightingale was also in the room and handed the envelope to Su Buling. Jeju and Chuchu have already packed their things. If the young master also goes back, I will go and say hello to General Yang. Su Buling took out the letter paper, unfolded it and looked at it carefully. It was a handwritten letter from Xiang and the words were relatively plain. It seemed that Kui Xiaoan was just sick and the medical girl couldn't cure it, so she asked Jeju, who was proficient in medical skills, to go back and take a look. But Su Buling knew Xiang so writing this letter was definitely no small matter. To put it bluntly, he was just afraid that he would be anxious. After Su Buling glanced at it, he put away the letter and walked to his room. Pack your things and leave now. Ningyu he followed behind and looked outside. Ling you just arrived outside Yangzhou City. If you go back now, will you? Su Buling waved his hand. We have reached the capital of South Vietnam. The Chen family has no way to go. The rest of the matter is the same whether I am here or not. I will just write a letter to Yang Zunyi and explain it. When Ningyu he saw this, he didn't say much and went back to the room to wake up Qing Yet. After a while, the 6 people left the inn and rushed out of the city. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 784. 3 days later, the wind stopped and the rain stopped. Outside Chayuling, tens of thousands of Yu troops, led by Yang Zunyi, bombarded the pass again. The sound of the cannon was like a death warrant. The news quickly spread to Yangzhou City, dozens of miles away. The Nanyu officials and Chen clan who were arguing in the court suddenly became quiet. Chen Jin, who was sitting on the throne, had actually made a decision the night he learned about the current situation and had been waiting for the sound of the cannon. When the court was silent, half of them looked outside the city and half looked at him. Chen Jin picked up a pen on the rice paper and wrote an edict that would be recorded in the history books forever. The world is divided into 3 parts, and the people have suffered from war and heavy taxes for many years. Since I succeeded to the throne, I have been unable to handle the government affairs due to my stubborn illness, which has led to treacherous officials in power and public resentment. This is an unforgivable crime. Today, Dayo is at its peak and has shown signs of unification. I cannot bear to see the Yu people suffer from war again, so I abolished the throne of Baiyu and honored the Song family of Dayo as the emperor. I offered all the 15 states, 104 counties, 943,700 households, and 205,300 soldiers under my jurisdiction to Dayo, and called on all the tribes of Baiyu to respect the Song family of Dayo as the orthodox and not to start a war. I hope the Zhang family of northern Qi will take this as a lesson. This edict calling for the peaceful unification of Dayo and Nanyu is obviously selfless, but it was written when the Ziliang army was at the gates of the city, and it was also helpless. The ministers in the court of Nanyu were relieved when they saw this edict. If they continued to resist, their country would be destroyed. If they gave up the throne and surrendered openly, everyone could keep their current status. It was not considered selling out the country for glory, and they could also get a reputation of being selfless and selfless. The happiest people were the people of Nanyu, because they no longer had to fight. This was the perfect ending for Nanyu at the moment. The imperial edict was quickly delivered to the Ziliang army camp outside Chayuling, and the imperial edict of Dayo with the imperial seal was sent back a few days later. Song Ling, the emperor of Dayo, was very pleased with Chen Jin's righteous act. He changed Chen Jin's title to King of Shanyang and asked him to go north to Chang'an to meet the emperor and receive the title of king. Even if Chen Jin gave up the throne, the eldest son of the family would never step into Nanyu again in his life. It was inevitable to live in Chang'an for retirement. However, the collateral line of the Chen family could still stay in their hometown and continue to maintain the family business that had been passed down for hundreds of years. In the future, as long as they did not commit suicide and rebel, they would be able to live as long as Dayo with the imperial edict of Chen Jin. No emperor would dare to kill all the Chen family, because if they did, no one would promote unification in a peaceful way. Of course, not everyone was happy about this righteous edict. When this news spread, the most angry people must be the newly established Dongyu and the northern Qi far away on the prairie. Surrender, surrender. Chen Jin respects the puppet emperor Songling as the orthodox, and even wrote a special sentence. I hope the Zhang family of northern Qi will take this as a lesson. Isn't this disgusting? Everyone knows that as long as Dongyu and northern Qi give up the emperor and the throne, the world will be unified directly, and no civilians or soldiers will die, but everyone can only think that this is impossible. If it is possible, the Su family will give up the throne and give the Ziliang army to Songji. The world would have been unified long ago, and it would still be like this now. However, Su Buling has already fought to Yangzhou City. If the Chen family does not surrender, they will also be exterminated. Northern Qi and Dongyu can't help. Even if they see this edict, they can only sneer a few words. Recognize the thief as your father and feel ashamed of your ancestors. There is no other way. After writing the edict, Chen Jin actually anticipated the result later. After the court was dismissed, he went directly to Fuyan Palace. Chen Xining had been paying attention to the situation in the court. After his father came over, he hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. Father, if you hand over the military power, if Dayo becomes afraid in the future, my Chen family will become fish in the palm of your hand. Since Chen Jin woke up, he basically hasn't slept well again. He came down from the court, looking very tired. After sitting on the couch, he shook his head and said, "Now we are fish in the palm of your hand. If you don't hand over the military power, the whole family will be wiped out from the world tomorrow." Su Buling wants to unify the world. The time, the place, and the people are all on his side. No one can stop him. Since the decision has been made, it is meaningless to say these now. Chen Xining poured a cup of tea and sat down next to him, sighing softly. In fact, Chen Jin was also afraid that Su Buling would turn around and stab him in the future, but there was really no way. If he was given more time, even a few more months, he would have a chance to come back to life and keep the throne of Nanyu, and at most lose some territory. Now that he has woken up when they have knocked on his door, what can he do even if he has the ability to reach the sky? Chen Jin held the teacup, thought for a while, and said, Xining, now, the head of Dayo is Su Wang, and Su Buling is Su Wang's only son. If I am not mistaken, when Dongyu and Baiki are destroyed, it will be the time for the Su family to replace you with Su. Chen Xining had already seen it. With Su Buling's temper of rushing into the 100 Insects Valley alone and killing more than 300 people without changing his expression, even the King of Hell would have to kneel down. If you expect such a person to bow down, the other party must be his father. Chen Jin turned his eyes to his grown-up daughter and said softly, "When you were young, your father rarely cared about you. After you were killed by the villain, you had no chance. Now, in the blink of an eye, you have reached the age to get married." Chen Xining was stunned. She didn't understand why her father's words were so jumpy. He was still talking about Su Buling just now, and now. Chen Xining sat up straighter. "Father, why are you saying this?" Chen Jin sighed. "Last time, you and Su Buling came together at night. We should have a good relationship. Although my father doesn't want to force you to get married, thousands of lives of the Chen family are tied to my father's hands. An imperial edict really makes my heart uneasy." Chen Xining was very smart and blinked. "Father, do you want to marry with the Su family to ensure that my Chen family will not be liquidated in the future?" Chen Jin nodded. "I have been ashamed of you and your mother since I was a child. If you don't want to get married, your father shouldn't force you, but when you encounter this change, it is really helpless." Chen Shining raised her hand and scratched her head. Father, if I want to marry, I have to marry someone else. Have you ever seen Su Buling? His appearance and martial arts skills are unparalleled in the world. He is also a powerful person with great power. Guangbaqui is next to him. There are 3 of them, and I don't know if there are any more at home. What kind of beauties have I never seen? How can you care about me as a little princess? Besides, I will no longer be a princess, I can only be regarded as the princess. Chen Jin frowned. He thought deeply for a long time, but it seemed that he had not considered this matter. Chen Jin looked at her daughter for a few times. She looked very beautiful and beautiful. Logically speaking, no man would dislike her. Shining, what is your relationship with Su Buling? Well. Chen Shining thought about it for a moment, shook her head and sighed. Although he is surrounded by beauties, he is relatively cold and gentlemanly. He seems to have little interest in beauty. I followed him to find an antidote for my father. Several times, he was able to take advantage of me, but he didn't do anything. He protected me twice when we were at Yulong Ridge, but it was out of chivalry. Speaking of love between men and women, I don't think it can be discussed. Chen Jin nodded slowly and thought for a moment, no matter what, he doesn't hate you, right? This. Chen Shining thought about it carefully and nodded seriously, that's true. That'll do. Chen Jin's eyes were filled with relief, and she said seriously, I will write a letter for my father tomorrow to test his tone. When Chen Shining heard this, she felt slightly panicked and quickly shook her head. Father, no, if you say it directly, with Su Buling's behavior, if you don't like me, I will definitely refuse. If you like me, you will come over and ask me what I mean. It's a bit inappropriate. Chen Jin observed his daughter and asked, then what are your ideas? What ideas can Chen Shining have? She didn't even know what she was doing, and her head was confused. She thought for a moment and said softly. My daughter knows the stakes of this matter. If no one is by Su Buling's side, the safety of our Chen family will be in danger. But no one cares about the woman who was sent directly, or, how about I go and find out what's going on myself? What if he has fallen in love with his daughter? For the sake of the Chen family, I have to compromise. If he is not interested in me, I will find a way to let him find a girl from the Chen family. Chen Jin rubbed her fingers and considered for a moment. It's okay, a woman is chasing a man, and there's a layer of gauze between them. With your cleverness, it won't take much effort. He looked at Chen Shining. I just wronged you. Don't feel wronged. This is what I should do. He. Half an hour later, the carriage slowly drove through the imperial city and walked on Chaohuang Street. Chen Shining sat by the car window, carefully searching for people on the street. The relatively smart blue and white skirt she wore was rarely changed into a pleated skirt, and her hair was also changed into a style popular in the Central Plains. Nanny Song sat in front of her, carefully stroking her eyebrows, and asked with some confusion. Your Highness, why are you dressed like this all of a sudden? To exchange good books, follow the VX official account. Book Friends Base Camp. Follow now and get cash red envelopes. Chen Shining's expression was slightly strange, her eyes swept across the empty alley, and she said softly. It's nothing, I just came out for a walk on a whim. Aunt Song had brought up Chen Shining since she was a child. How could she not see her daughter's family's little thoughts? A daughter only looks after herself to please her. She shook her head and smiled, but did not point it out. The carriage passed through the long street, and there was some chaos on the street. Not long after the edict was issued, pedestrians were everywhere running to tell each other, and there were also many people who were crying with joy because they were relieved of the worries of war. All kinds of things came into view, but Chen Xining's mind was not focused on these things at all. He just scanned the corners of the street carefully, trying to find that familiar shadow, and his heart was agitated, thinking about his father. Just what you said. I'm doing it for South Vietnam, just trying to find out. With his character, he probably wouldn't agree, and it seemed a bit embarrassing to be rejected. What if I really agree? While thinking wildly, Chen Xining slowly backed down again, but thinking of the stability of the Chen family, she still managed to calm down and looked for Su Buling on the street. It's a pity that this time, we are destined to miss it. Where are people? Didn't they send people to keep an eye on the outside of the imperial city? I knew it as soon as I came out. Chen Xining's brows gradually wrinkled. After coming and going for a long time, she never saw Su Buling. Instead, she saw Su Ying, one of the 4 great kings in the Ziliang army, leading his team through Chaohuang Street. The edict must have reached the Ziliang army, and the two sides had shaken hands and made peace. Su Ying's trip was obviously to the imperial city to meet Chen Jin. Chen Xining followed the Ziliang army to the capital, and naturally recognized the young general beside Su Buling. She quickly jumped off the carriage, ran to the side of the envoy team, and said, "General Su, why isn't your young prince here?" Su Ying was not surprised to see Chen Xining. He got off his horse and took out a letter from his arms. "The young prince asked me to pass it to Her Royal Highness the Princess. There should be an explanation in the letter." Chen Xining was a little confused. She raised her hand to take the envelope and took a look. She saw that it was written on the letter. "Her Royal Highness, I left in advance because of something at home. I was unable to say goodbye in person. Please forgive me. We are thousands of miles apart. I don't know when we will meet again. I hope that the wind will stop and the rain will stop in the future, and we can drink and talk happily again. See you in the rivers and lakes." The few short words are enough to show the haste of writing. Chen Xining looked at the letter in her hand and was silent. She did not feel disappointed or dissatisfied because of Su Buletinling's departure without saying goodbye. Instead, she curled her lips. After all, in this situation, he did not forget to leave her a letter to explain, which at least showed that Su Buletinling regarded her as a friend. "I hope the wind will stop and the rain will stop, so we can drink and talk happily again." Chen Xining whispered softly and looked up at the sky. The heavy rain that lasted for several days seemed to have stopped. Volume 10, Nanshan Mystery. Nanshan has thousands of mountains and hills, and the mysterious cave is hard to find. End. Volume 11, Northern Territory Wandering Dragon. The sky of the frozen northern region is silent, and the dragon wanders thousands of miles in the lush grass. Stay tuned. Thanks to Suyaya for the reward. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 785. Chapter 785. Because I have to write the detailed outline of the 11th volume, I will update it once today. Speed and quality cannot be balanced, especially since the number of words in The Prince has reached 2 million, which is the longest chapter that a Guan has written so far. For books that are too long, it is easy for the early and late stages to be disconnected. For example, in a cultivation article, the plot of the early foundation building period has almost nothing to do with the later Mahayana period of overcoming the tribulation, because the villain at that time can no longer play a role in the later plot. Historical articles are similar. The difficulties and opponents encountered by the county magistrate in the early stage when taking the imperial examination are completely different from those faced by the prime minister in the later stage. Normally, it is correct to write like this. When the author writes about the confrontation with Daizumojin in the later stage, he does not need to recall the 1 or 2 people he met when he just built his foundation. But it is obviously not okay for the prince to write like this. The prince's only goal is to write a good heroine, so even in the later stage, he must remember every little bit at the beginning, to the point that, Man Zi went home alone and took Lu Hoer's peanuts. Aunt Lu was afraid that Bao Bao would like Su Buling, so she sewed a shit yellow robe for him. Bao Bao waited for Su Buling to come and apologize and kicked the fruit plate under the soft couch to hide it, etc. These little plots that almost no one remembers represent the character's personality. If the author forgets the character setting, the character will collapse. But Guan Guan's memory is limited. The longer the length of the article, the more things he will forget in the early stage. Over time, the heroine has become a name without any characteristics. Even the heroine's personality has been forgotten, so what he wrote is naturally tasteless and only water is left. In order to stabilize in the later stage, the update is much slower than in the early stage, but the time spent thinking about the plot every day is several times more than before. In the past, I could write as soon as I picked up the pen, but now I can't write anything even with 3 sticks. Guan Guan is actually very desperate. This is also a little experience accumulated from writing The Prince, and I can only try to avoid it in the next book. The Prince has completed 10 volumes so far, and the word count is just over 2 million words. According to estimates, there should be 2 more volumes of content, 1 volume of 200,000 words, and the final volume will be about 2.5 million words, which is estimated to take 2 months. I hope that the next plot can wrap up well without regrets, and not disappoint the brothers and sisters who have supported me so far. Thank you all for your continued support. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 786. Calculate marriage, calculate good and bad luck, get married, accept the bride price, break the ground for the new home. The north wind was like a knife, rolling up the snow all over the sky, burying the dust that had accumulated for who knows how many years on the long Lois Street. The girl in a sheepskin jacket sat alone outside the tea house, shouting to attract customers. In the tea house behind her, an old woman sat by the stove to warm herself. In front of the girl was a square table with a bagua map, and a bucket of bamboo sticks on the table. There were 108 sticks, 106 up, 1 mid, and 1 down. With such an arrangement, it is definitely not accurate, but people passing by on weekdays will still come to calculate a hang. Because the world is like this, if you are smooth sailing, you have to be cautious 100 times, but if you die on the street, you only need 1 knife. The girl had an iron gun stuck in her back, with a fortune-telling banner hanging on it, and she didn't look like a Taoist priest. But it is not unusual in this place. The prostitute in the brothel opposite also has a dagger tied to her leg, and the waiter in the tavern next to her also has a machete on his waist. On this street, you can't live without a knife. This street is very prosperous, so prosperous that people pass by the street all year round, day and night. This street is also dilapidated, so dilapidated that there is an endless desert in front and behind, and broken walls and old tiles eroded by wind and sand on the left and right. There are horse bandits, prostitutes, merchants, spies, and all kinds of people you can think of on the street, but there is no ordinary person. Because this place is called Kaiyufen Town, Mobei is the wild land of the world, and Kaiyufen Town is the wild land of Mobei. Ordinary people will not come here, and even if they come, most of them are buried under the wind, snow, and flying sand outside the street. Calculate marriage, calculate good and bad luck, marry and accept the betrothal gifts, break the ground for entering the house. The clear voice is sometimes far and sometimes near in the wind and snow. A young man walked to the northern street corner. The people hiding in the brothels and taverns seemed to have smelled the bloody wolves of Mobei. Countless eyes penetrated the wind and snow and fell on the young man, causing the long street to be slightly quiet. The young man was wearing a straw raincoat to block the wind and snow, and the handle and horsehide scabbard were exposed under the raincoat. The handle of the knife, which was originally wrapped with a white rope, showed a black color, so black that it was shiny, just like the black rag stained with wine and meat oil stains on the waiter's hand. People on the street could see that it was a stain, but it was not an oil stain, but a blood stain. It took who knows how long and how many people's blood to stain it. After a brief look, the street returned to its noisy appearance, as if it was just an ordinary town on the border of Mobei, and there was no murderous intention. The young swordsman walked slowly, his footsteps were very light, and he almost left no trace on the snow. He glanced at the street and saw the girl outside the tea house first. The girl was too eye-catching, with a clean sheepskin coat, 2 braids on her head, and 2 furry handcuffs on her hands, covering her red face from the cold. Compared with other people on this street, she looked like a girl from the neighborhood who was just hanging out, sitting among the hungry wolves. She shouldn't be here. But she has already appeared, which means she is more dangerous than the wolves around. The young swordsman picked up his bamboo hat, came to the tea house, covered the handle of the knife with his straw raincoat, and sat down across the table. Can the girl tell fortunes? Yes. Seeing the guests coming, the girl took her warmed hands out of the handcuffs and picked up the fortune stick on the table. Her hands were beautiful, with long fingers, and she was a good candidate for holding weapons. But there were calluses on her palms, which meant that she had just held a weapon for a short time and was a newcomer who had not yet come out of the mountains. The young swordsman looked down at his palms, which also had long fingers and calluses before, but they were gone because he had held the knife for too long. The young swordsman lost interest in making friends through martial arts, and no longer looked at the girl's hand, but looked at the fortune-telling box on the table. "What's your name, girl?" The girl pushed the fortune-telling box in front of the swordsman, swinging her legs habitually. "Left." The young swordsman looked to the left, and there was nothing else in front of him except the endless wind and snow. He turned back again. "I said my name is Left, not to let you look at the left." The girl explained seriously and continued to ask, "What do you want to calculate, sir?" The young swordsman thought carefully. He never believed in yin and yang divination, he only believed in the sword in his hand. People in the desert of Mobei were like this. He came here just to find someone different to chat with. "How about the girl on the left? Please calculate what I want to calculate." The lady on the left looked at him seriously and said, "You are young and handsome. You must be lonely to come out alone in the snow. In my opinion, you want to calculate your marriage, right?" The young swordsman smiled, and his smile was very sunny, but his natural willow-shaped eyebrows made his face look a little feminine. He nodded. "Then calculate your marriage." As he said this, the young swordsman picked up the bamboo tube with one hand, shook it twice, and a bamboo stick fell on the table. The lady on the left looked down and saw 4 lines of small characters on it. "A withered tree rarely sees spring, and a lonely boat encounters a strong wind. If you set out without anyone to rely on, nothing will go well. A bad fortune." Zoe frowned and looked at the young swordsman opposite with a little dissatisfaction. "You want to ruin the show, don't you? There are 106 good sticks, and you deliberately shook out this one. How can I interpret the stick for you? I haven't learned it yet." In the tea house behind, the old woman who was boiling tea by the stove shook her head and smiled. "Zoe, be more polite to the guests. If you are fierce, who will ask you to tell fortunes in the future?" Zoe said, "Oh," put the bamboo stick back, and pushed it in front of the swordsman. "It doesn't count just now, shake it again." The young swordsman looked at the bamboo stick in the stick. Without saying a word, he took out 5 copper coins from his arms, put them on the table, stood up and walked to the other end of the long street. Zozo called twice, but the swordsman never looked back. Seeing the other party walking away, Zozo could only stand up and said loudly, "My fortune telling is not accurate at all, and it is even more inaccurate if you cheat. If something happens, don't blame it on me. The young swordsman did not react and left the long street with light steps, just as he came. The one on the left wanted to chase him out and return the copper coins to the swordsman, but the old woman by the stove waved. Come back, the path you choose is better than the path destined by God. Zozo paused, looked at the copper coins in his hand, returned to the tea house somewhat unhappily, sat down next to the stove, and complained. We just opened today, so it's very unlucky to get a very unlucky sign. Everyone is looking for peace of mind, but it's better for him to deliberately make himself uncomfortable. Grandma, what do you think he wants? The old woman is very old, and her face is full of wrinkles, but from her bones, she can still vaguely see her charming appearance when she was young. She shook her head. You are still young and don't understand the word love. Sometimes it is better to let go when your heart is filled with despair, than to be stubborn and unable to let go. He signed the sign for himself, which means that he feels that there is no chance. If he shook it on purpose, if you sign it, you are deceiving yourself and others and being stubborn. The left person blinked, and she really didn't understand the reason for such a roundabout way, but she didn't agree with the old woman's previous words. Grandma, I will be 15 after the new year. If we were in the Central Plains, we could get married and have children. My mother was born in my 15th or 16th year. How am I younger? The old woman's eyes were fond of her. Okay, you are no longer a little girl, you are now a big girl. You have lived in Baiki for a few years, and your mother is also here. Are you still thinking about the Central Plains? The one on the left holds the 5 copper coins he just got, and buys a bunch of candied haws on the street. He goes back to sit down by the stove, licks it happily, and says with a smile. The Central Plains is great. The most delicious candied haws in the world is in Chang'an. It is much more delicious than the candied haws here. Master said that South Vietnam would surrender without a fight. The Emperor of Dongyu was anxious and prepared to form an alliance with us. If the two families join forces, I will be able to go to Chang'an soon, and I will take my grandma there to have a look. The old woman shook her head and smiled. She didn't seem to want to talk about these things and didn't speak. After licking the candied haws on the left for a while, she noticed that the old woman's gaze had been in the direction where the young swordsman was leaving. She looked back. Grandma, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with that swordsman? The old woman asked. Just now, did he really do anything? Zozo thought for a moment. Definitely, his martial arts skills are very high. I can't even tell the difference. He must have deliberately shaken the lottery to tease me. There are more than 100 people who have the lottery, and only one has the lottery. How can it be possible? Shake it out in one go. The old woman was silent for a moment, looked at the direction in which the young swordsman left, and sighed softly. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 787. On the 7th day of the winter month, snow was falling for thousands of miles. The ship moored in the suburbs of Yueyang City was covered with a layer of snow on board and under the ship. There were no birds or people along the coast, as if they were frozen in the ice and snow. On the terrace of the ship, the doors and windows were closed to prevent the cold wind from entering the house. The 2 lounge chairs were placed in their original positions. No one had been lying on them for a long time, and a thick layer of snow had accumulated. In the flower pots next to them, the petals and leaves had long withered, leaving only the dry stamens hanging on the bare branches, as if they would completely wither with any breeze. In the study room on the 2nd floor of the ship, medical books were piled up like mountains, from the spring and autumn period to the present, from the secret recipes of the palace to the folk recipes of Chu. Basically, everything that could be found was here. Xiao Qi and Song Yufu were among them, carefully reading page by page, fearing that they would miss a little useful information. On the deck, Zhu Manzi was wearing a cloak and looking at the south with a telescope. He stood there for too long, and the red cloak had turned white. The black dog waiting beside him had also turned into a white dog without him noticing. He waited and waited like this, and he didn't know how long he had been waiting. Finally, in the afternoon, 5 fast horses came galloping from the Xiangjiang River. Along the river, there was continuous wind and snow, and the horses' hooves left bowl-sized footprints on the snow, which were covered by heavy snow in the blink of an eye. Su Buling rode a black horse in the front, with white frost on his heroic eyebrows. The wind-chasing horse under his crotch was panting like an ox, and white mist was sprayed from its mouth and nose. It was already overwhelmed, but fortunately, the building ship was already in front of him. After leaving Yangzhou City, Su Buling rushed back to Chu without stopping, crossing nearly 2,000 miles of mountains and rivers, and it only took more than 10 days. Only his and Neng Qingyi's 2 wind-chasing horses could hold on from beginning to end. Nightingale and others had to change horses at the post stations along the way to barely keep up with the pace. Long-term running in the cold winter is extremely exhausting for both people and horses. Chu, who had just gotten married and was not very good at martial arts, was almost exhausted. Qingyi was almost the same. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to hurry on. In order to prevent him from falling off his horse, Ning Yuhe and Yang walked in front of him and kept an eye on him. Zhongli Jiju was a doctor and was about to return to the ship. At this time, she sat behind Su Buling to recuperate and prepare for treating and saving people later. On the way here, she also got some general information from the post station, but medical practice requires observation, smell, questioning and palpation. She still had to take a closer look to know what disease Xiaoan had. The little sparrow had run so far and was already frozen silly. At this time, it went directly into Jeju's clothes without even showing its head, so Jeju had to look down from time to time to make sure that the little sparrow was fine. Seeing the trace of the riverside boat in the distance, Su Buling sped up his horse a little bit. On the deck of the boat, Zhu Manzi, who had been looking out with a telescope, waved her hand and ran back to the boathouse to inform the girls who had been waiting for a long time. Soon, Xiao Xiang'er appeared on the terrace behind the boathouse. Xiao Xiang'er was still wearing a red dress, but she was obviously a little haggard and tired. It should be because she had not rested well after taking care of her for a long time. She didn't even have the strength to walk. She just raised her hand and waved, signaling Su Buling to come quickly. Xiao Qi and Song Yufu walked out of the boathouse. Their faces were also not very good, and they quickly arranged for the maids to prepare hot water and food. Su Buling walked halfway and saw that the wind-chasing horse could no longer sprint at full speed after running for a long distance, so he simply jumped off the horse, hugged Jeju and ran to the side of the building ship, leaped onto the deck with a big step, and asked, "What's the situation?" Xiao Qi saw that Su Buling's hair and eyebrows were covered with frost and snow, and she felt distressed in her heart, but at this time, it was obviously impossible to care about the love between men and women. She took Su Buling to the boathouse and said along the way, "My Xiao family is good at medicine, and we have invited the best doctor to come. At first, we thought that Xiaoan had been alone in the mountains for too long, and the accumulated worries had buried the cold and her body collapsed. But I have carefully treated her with medicine, and the many famous doctors we invited did not think that the medicine was wrong. Xiaoan's cough has improved a little, but her body has not improved at all, and she has become weaker and weaker." Song Yufu trotted behind and helped hold Jeju's medicine box, with a little anxiety on her face. "Sister Xiang'er thinks it's a heart disease, but heart disease is a mysterious thing, most of which is caused by a difficult knot in the heart. We can't figure out what Sister Kui has. Heart knot, so I hurriedly called my husband and Jeju back." Zhu Manzi regarded Jia Gonggong as a close friend regardless of age. After Jia Gonggong left, Xiaoan had no one to take care of her. Zhu Manzi actually always regarded this as her responsibility. At this time, she was also worried. Sister Xiang'er has told all the jokes she knows. In the end, I went to make Sister Kui happy. Unfortunately, Sister Kui didn't buy my tricks and now she doesn't listen to anyone. I have thought of all the ways I can think of. Hongluan went to the temple to burn incense and worship Buddha. If I hadn't stopped her, Hongluan would have invited the shaman to come and toss. The three girls talked about the situation in recent days, and they had reached the stern in 2 sentences. Before Su Buling and Zhongli Jiju approached, Xiao Xiang'er had already walked out of the house. Since Kui Zioan got sick, Xiao Xiang'er had never comforted her and had never had a good night's sleep. She had been by her side day and night, and her body had obviously reached its limit. When she saw Su Buling again, Xiao Xiang'er did not hide her anxiety and grievance on her face, and waved on tiptoe, "Su Buling, run faster, why did you come back so late? I was so anxious." Xiao Xiang'er was Zioan's nominal mother-in-law, and she had promised Su Buling to take good care of Zioan. Although it was not her responsibility for what happened now, how could Xiao Xiang'er not feel guilty and self-blame in her heart? Su Buling walked over quickly, supported Xiao Xiang'er, who was almost exhausted from staying up late for a long time, and persuaded her softly. "Don't panic, Kikai, take Xiang'er to rest first, I'll go in and take a look." Xiao Xiang'er was unwilling to leave, and pulled the omnipotent Zhongli Jiju to run to the inner room. There was a smell of medicine in the room, which was not pungent with the burning incense, but the originally clean and tidy room was a little messy. In order to relax Kui Zioan, Xiao Xiang'er basically turned out all the rare objects in her collection, but obviously none of them were used. Zhongli Jiju carried the medicine box, and in order to prevent the nervous mood from affecting the patient, he slowed down his expression first, tidied his clothes a little, and then walked into the inner room slowly. Su Buling followed closely behind, looked up, and saw that the bed was covered with thick bedding. Kui Zioan was lying on the pillow with a towel on her forehead. Her small and beautiful face was no longer lively as before, and her lips were pale and weak. Kui Zioan was already pitiful, and now she looked like this, which made people feel distressed. Perhaps she had heard the sound. Kui Zioan had woken up and tilted her head to look at Su Buling. After the two looked at each other for a while, Kui Zioan's eyes showed a little subtle expression, raised her head slightly, and smiled. "Why did you come back?" "Just finished writing the outline, and will try to speed up the update later. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 788. Why did you come back? Kui Zioan's voice was not as clear and ethereal as before, but her thoughts were very clear. Su Buletinling felt a little relieved, at least it wasn't as bad as he imagined. He walked to the bed and squatted down, looking carefully. "I'll be back when I'm done." Kui Zioan wanted to sit up, but just as she was about to raise her hand to lift the quilt, she remembered something again and shrank a little deeper into the silk quilt. "I didn't have any clothes on, so I didn't get up. I'm fine. I was just enjoying the cool air outside. I accidentally fell asleep and got a bit cold. I'm much better now." Although the tone and demeanor of his speech were not much different from the past, you could clearly see the weakness in his eyes, and he pretended to be relaxed. Maybe he was just holding on, not wanting Su Buling to worry. Su Buling could see it, and it was difficult to react with too much concern. He just smiled as peacefully as before. "It's okay. Let's wait for the snow to stop in a few days. Let's go for a walk together. I heard that there is a winter sweet forest in Yueyang. The scenery must be good this season." As he spoke, Su Buling raised his hand to tuck the quilt tighter, but saw the corners of the mahogany sign exposed under the quilt. The scratches on it had not been touched for a long time. Su Buling sighed secretly, thought for a while, and took the opportunity to tuck in the quilt and rub the back of his hand on Kui Zioan's cheek. The skin was very white and soft to the touch, but the body temperature was very high, and it even felt a little hot. Kui Zioan had been staring into Su Buling's eyes. At this time, she shrank back in a hurry and said crisply, "Your hands are so cold." "Oh, yeah, I didn't pay attention." Su Buling chuckled and took his hand back. Kui Zioan moved her hands under the quilt, obviously wanting to get her mahogany tag to keep accounts, but there were other people in the room, so she thought about it and forgot about it. Xiao Xianger had been standing behind him, and when he saw this scene, there was a bit of relief in his eyes. Accompanying her day and night every day, she naturally saw some changes in Kui Zioan, just like a potted flower with all its branches and leaves suddenly pulling out a few strands of green. Although it was so small that it was invisible, there were always signs of improvement. Zhongli Jiju knelt down beside the bed, put her hand under the quilt, touched Kui Zioan's wrist, and checked her pulse carefully. Although Su Buling's expression was calm, how could he not be a little worried in his heart? He asked softly, "How's it going?" Zhongli Jiju frowned and checked his pulse carefully for a moment, and then prepared to look at Kui Zioan's face and eyes. He realized that there were people behind him, and they were surrounded by people. He said helplessly, "It's not a big deal, why are everyone gathered here?" Xiao Qi felt the same way. Zioan was originally withdrawn, and having everyone around her would only do bad things. She turned around and left with Yufu and Manzi. "Let Jeju be busy. Let's all go out. Don't disturb Jeju." Su Buring also felt that it was not good for him to squat here, so he stood up and took out a small painted purse from his arms, with a pattern of auspicious animals outlined on it. It was a congratulatory gift from Aunt Gui of the 18th village when he married Chu Chu. It is regarded as the mascot of southern Xinjiang, symbolizing no disease, no disaster, many children, and many blessings. Su Buling put his purse next to the pillow, then stood up and walked out of the room. Kui Zioan kept her eyes on Su Buling until her back disappeared, then she turned to look at the purse next to the pillow and whispered, "Mother likes these, so why give them to me? It's not sincere." Having said that, his eyes were very soft, and he obviously liked it. Zhongli Jiju sat beside the bed, seeing Kui Zioan's expression in her eyes, sighed secretly, and said with a smile, "All men are like this. Apart from their purses and hairpins, there is no way to choose a gift. Come on, open your mouth." Yetu. Ah. After Su Buling came back, there seemed to be a backbone on the building. Everyone was relieved from the dullness, and the atmosphere became a little more relaxed. Ning Qingyi and Chu Chuma were slower and walked behind. They were too exhausted when they came back and couldn't help. After washing off the dust from their bodies, they went back to their rooms to sleep. Lu Hongluan was burning incense and praying for blessings in a nearby Taoist temple. When he heard that Su Buling had arrived, he also rushed back with Yunu. It's worth being happy to meet again after a long absence, but everyone is thinking about Kui Zioan, and they don't have the intention to hold a big banquet to celebrate. The family just sat together and had a simple meal, talking about their parents' quarrels. Zhongli Jiju has been checking Kui Zioan's body in the room at the stern of the ship. During this period, the doctor came in and out to deliver some medical equipment, but no results came out, which was quite difficult to think about. Su Buring didn't know medical skills, and couldn't run to ask again and again. He waited in the corridor until it got dark, and Zhongli Jiju finished his work and walked out of the room. Xiao Xianger was the most worried and hurriedly ran forward, took Jiju's hand and asked, "How's it going?" Zhongli Jiju's eyes looked a little sad. When he came to the room next to him, he said, "Xiao Wan just went to bed and took a closer look. It's not a big problem in a short time. She has been weak since she was a child and has a withdrawn temperament. She suffered from cold and depression, which made her fall ill like a mountain, and she is like this now. I want to when things get better, I definitely can't continue to be depressed, and I need to take care of my body and mind, My body is easy to take care of, but my heart disease is difficult to cure, so I can only stay with him more and use things to support my energy and calm my mind, and I should be fine over time." After Su Buling listened, he nodded slightly. Seeing Jeju's tired look, he said softly, "Take your time, don't rush. I'm tired from running around for so long. Let's go wash up and rest first. Let's talk tomorrow." After rushing back from South Vietnam, even Ning knew he couldn't bear to rest. Zhongli Jeju naturally felt uncomfortable, so she didn't force herself at the moment, nodded and followed the maid out. Su Buling originally wanted to go into the room to take a look, but Zioan had already gone to sleep. It would definitely not be good to rush in and wake him up, so he went down to wash up and go back to the room to rest. There was heavy snow outside the boat, and a light was like a bean in the window. After Su Buling washed up, he lay on Xiao Qi's big bed. After running around for more than 10 days, it was impossible not to be tired. He leaned against the bed and didn't want to move. Xiao Qi was wearing a black gauze nightgown, unfolded the quilt to cover Su Buling's waist and legs, then took off her embroidered shoes and climbed to the innermost side. Lu Hongluan had just finished taking a bath. Through the dim candlelight, she could see the proud scenery under the thin fabric, which was charming and elegant without losing its moist luster. She pulled Xiang'er to the bed, frowned and said, "Xiang'er, just sleep well. You don't know how to heal. What's the use of running into the room and beating you up? I've been looking after you all these days, and no matter how hard you try, one of you will fall." Xiao Xiang'er was still worried about Kui Zioan and wanted to run to the room to wait, but unfortunately she refused. Su Buling also saw that Xiang'er was tired, so he stretched out his hand to hug Xiang'er, hugged her limp body, adjusted her position so that she could lie down, and then raised his arms to hug Hongluan's shoulders, comforting her softly. "Jeju has seen it, haven't you? Zioan is fine except for being a little weak now. She will be fine in a few days." Xiao Xiang'er leaned in Su Buling's arms, but without the restlessness of the past, she looked slightly depressed. "Don't try to persuade me. It's not like I haven't studied medicine and I know the severity. Zioan is obviously suffering from a heart disease. As soon as you came back today, you feel much better. With someone by your side, recovery will naturally come faster. In fact, you should let him. If you go over there and give me a hug, I'll probably be half healed on the spot." Lu Hongluan had already regarded Kui Zioan as a Su family member. At this time, she hugged Su Buling's arm and nodded. "I think so. It's useless to just pray to God and worship Buddha. You even burned down the ancestral hall in Wudang Mountain, and you probably won't pay attention to it. Why don't you just get married to celebrate? Zioan is obviously lovesick. Just have a wedding on the spot." Su Buling looked a little helpless. Jeju said to adjust the medicine slowly. "Xiao Wangsu is like this and can't even stand up. Making such a mess will only add fuel to the fire and won't work." Xiao Qi leaned on the inside, also holding Su Buling's arm, and said seriously, "Yes. Zioan's illness is caused by thoughts, but the main reason is that she is too weak. She has a withdrawn personality and is easily hurt by love. She has to take medicine to slowly recuperate her body and mind. How can she give strong medicine and go straight to the bridal chamber? Wan is not Xiang'er. Xiang'er is lovesick, so this trick is useful." Xiao Xiang'er elbowed her sister with a slight dissatisfaction, but she also knew that recuperating her body was not something that happened overnight. She thought for a moment. "The war won't start until spring. You should find a way to spend more time with Zioan these days, tell stories, relax and so on. Don't think about accompanying me even if there is a bowl of water. We are not sick, so there is no rush for a day or two." "Good." Su Buletinling nodded and smiled, and hugged her a little tighter. There was snow falling outside the window, and the night was silent. It was probably the first time that the four of them lay together so peacefully. After confirming that Xiaoan was fine and having a rough solution, the four of them felt a little more relaxed. Lu Hongluan hugged her for a moment, then turned her attention to Xiao Xiang'er, who was leaning in Su Buling's arms. "Xiang'er, what are you doing lying down? If you don't want to move, just let your sister come over. Your sister has come all the way back, even if she doesn't serve her, and she still presses on her to prevent her from resting. You see, your sister has swallowed her saliva." Xiao Qi raised her eyebrows, and then glanced at Lu Hongluan angrily. "I'm just thirsty, help me get the water glass." Xiao Xiang'er leaned in Su Buring's arms, thinking about Xiao Wan in her heart. She really didn't have anything else on her mind. Seeing Lu Hongluan urging her to get up, she simply rolled to the side and lay down between Xiao Qi and Su Buring. She raised her hand and pulled him. "Lower bedding. You can come by yourself when you are greedy. Why are you dragging me and my sister along? Do you think we are all the same as you?" Lu Hongluan was still very conservative. If Xiang'er didn't do this first, she wouldn't be embarrassed to take the lead. At this time, she turned her back to Su Buling and acted like she was not interested. Su Buletinling was caught in the middle. Although he was too tired from the long journey to move, he couldn't really pretend to be dead at this time. He raised his hand and hugged Lu Hongluan into his arms, and said with a smile, "Aunt Lu, don't you know how to massage? I'm almost falling apart when I come back from riding a horse. Please help me push." Lu Hongluan pursed her lips and looked reluctant. After squinting at the two sisters, she slowly turned over and hooked Su Buling's neck. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 789. The night deepened. Under the whistling wind and snow, the boathouse was anchored by the river. As the river water rose and fell, it gradually became quiet. In the boathouse, Yu Nu dressed up beautifully and stood at the corner of the stairs, waiting for Lu Hongluan's call. It was a pity that she waited for a long time and got nothing. She was also caught by Chiao Yi, who ran over to eavesdrop on the room secretly. Then the two maids went back to their rooms in embarrassment. In the room downstairs, Zhongli Chuchu and Song Yufu lay together, chatting in a low voice about private topics between newlyweds. The two had a good relationship. At this time, they were married to Su Buling, so they naturally had more topics to talk about. However, Chuchu had just got married not long ago and was still a little reluctant. She kept talking about King Yi's things, such as not being able to get up, etc. Ning Qingyi was exhausted and fell asleep on the boat. He woke up again in the middle of the night and lay on the bed of his old friend Manzi, listening to Manzi's mumbling. In the cold winter, Zhu Manzi's sleeping posture was much better. She wrapped herself and Qingyi in a quilt like a caterpillar, hugged Qingyi like an octopus, just like hugging a big thermos, and grumbled with a little dissatisfaction. Afu has betrayed, Xiaozhong has also betrayed, and in a blink of an eye, we are the only two rookies on the boat. Oh, no, we are the only ones who are strong and loyal. As the saying goes, time reveals a person's true character. Now I understand that I have recognized you as my sister. I will not hold it against you for bullying me before. Ning Qingyi was naked, with Manzi's big white ball holding her arm. Her mind was no longer as innocent and pure as before. She felt very strange and kept thinking about the scene of messing around in the mountain village. Ning Qingyi was straightforward and never concealed her thoughts. Deliberately covering up made her expression look a little stiff, her eyes flickered, and she dared not look at Manzi. Zhu Manzi looked simple-minded, but her mind was very active. After saying a few words, she realized that something was wrong with her best friend. She raised her head and looked at Qingyi carefully. Xiaoning, you wouldn't have been with Mr. Su. I didn't. Ning Qingyi shook her head quickly, hesitated, and explained seriously. I am still a virgin, don't think about it. Zhu Manzi frowned, I'm not thinking about it, but why are you blushing? Look, it's pale again. Xiaoning, I regard you as a friend of life and death. If you also abandon me, I won't be the youngest. Ning Qingyi slightly avoided her gaze. How could she tell Manzi that Chuchu gave her a bad idea and forced her to participate in it? Being questioned was a bit unbearable, so he explained. I really didn't abandon you. People in the martial arts world keep their words. If they say they will go together, they will definitely go together. I blushed because I accidentally saw Chuchu and Su Buling doing that. Chuchu was so wild. Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up, and he lay down in front of him, supporting his chin with his hands. Really? How wild? Can he be better than your master and sister Xiang? Not really. Ning Qingyi was originally thin-skinned and didn't want to talk about these shameless things, so he simply changed the subject. Manzi, don't worry, you won't be the youngest. Zhu Manzi was quite disappointed, lying on his side, looking at Ning Qingyi's face. Why? Ning Qingyi thought for a moment, and said seriously, we met another woman in South Vietnam, about the same age as us, and now she is still young, so she must be the last one to enter the house. Zhu Manzi was a little interested when he heard this, and subconsciously straightened his chest. What kind of woman is older or younger than me? Ning Qingyi thought about it. She must be older than you, better in martial arts than you, taller than you, and more talkative than you. She keeps talking all day long, and only shuts up when her mouth is blocked or when she is sleeping. Zhu Manzi frowned, got up again, and turned Qingyi's face to face herself. Xiaoning, can you speak? Am I short? My martial arts skills are not good enough. Yeah. I'm serious, that woman can talk more than you, but she doesn't talk as well as you, don't worry. Zhu Manzi saw that Qingyi was not teasing her, and she felt a sense of crisis. Where is that woman now? I'll go meet her. Ning Qingyi shook his head. She was thrown in South Vietnam, but Su Buling left a letter. It seems that we will meet again in the future. You have to work harder, don't let others catch up and overtake you. Zhu Manzi nodded thoughtfully, lay flat beside him, pondered for a while, looked down at the capital he was proud of, and asked in a low voice. Is that woman really older than me? Yeah, older than you, about the same as me. Tisk. Zhu Manzi rolled her eyes and had nothing to say. It was not easy to march in the cold winter, and the news from all over the country also decreased sharply, so the ship was very quiet. Su Buling rested for a night, and the next day he began to stay in front of Kui Zioan, telling stories and poems as usual, arousing Zioan's interest and making her feel more relaxed. However, Su Buling was not a poet, and he had basically told Zioan all the poems and songs he knew. Zioan didn't like to listen to more tragic stories, and she didn't have any in her stomach, so she could only rack her brains to make up some stories. Fortunately, Kui Zioan was not picky. As long as it was Su Buling's story, she liked to listen to it, even if she had heard it many times. Cultivating the body and mind must be a long process. Just by chatting with her for 2 days, you can't recover immediately. Lying in bed for a long time is not good for your health, so Su Buling thought about waiting for the weather to get better and taking Zioan out to relax. It was only 3 days after returning to the ship, and the heavy snow had not stopped yet, but a letter was delivered to Su Buling. At noon, the girls on the ship hid in their rooms to keep warm. Su Buling sat in Xiang's room and told the story of the legend of Abai that he had adapted. Kui Zioan lay on the bed, her 2 white jade hands stretched out from the quilt, helping Su Buling pick melon seeds, and asked from time to time as usual. Isn't it Faye who suppresses demons? How did he become a woman? Well, Faye reincarnated and became a princess. Didn't you meet Su Xian on the broken bridge? How did you become under the eaves? There is no broken bridge over there. Faye reincarnated and met Su Xian, so should Su Xian marry Abai or Faye? Well, marry them both. Just as they were chatting in this mess, there was a knock on the door, and then Song Yufu's voice came. Husband. Su Buling stopped talking, looked back, asked Xiaoan to cover the quilt, got up and went to the outer room and opened the door. Outside the door, Song Yufu's eyes were full of joy, and she was holding an envelope in her hand, which was obviously just delivered. She handed the envelope to Su Buling and whispered. My husband, I wrote a letter to my grandfather a few days ago, asking him if he had any ideas. I thought he would ignore me, but I didn't expect him to send a letter to me just now. My grandfather has great magical powers, so he must have a way. I haven't had time to read it yet. Su Buling took the envelope and was a little surprised. Yuelu Mountain is actually 100 miles away, and it only takes a day to go back and forth. It's just that the old man's behavior is unpredictable, so he has never visited him. Although he doesn't like the old man's style of doing things, Su Buling still knows about his great magical powers. He closed the door, and went to Xiao Qi's study with Yufu, opened it and read it carefully. Maybe the situation has become clearer now, and the old master is no longer as mysterious as before, leaving people guessing with a few words. The letter clearly states two things. First, the old master cannot cure diseases, but he knows that there is a 1,000-year-old agar wood in the imperial city of the previous dynasty Deqi. It was found by the national teacher Zhou Jixian to help the emperor of Deqi recuperate because the founding emperor of Deqi was in poor health in his later years. It came from the Chu family of the Chu state in the spring and autumn period. The agar wood was carved into a paperweight and placed in the imperial city of Chang'an for 300 years. When Chang'an was conquered a year ago, it was taken away by the palace people and sent to northern Qi. It is unknown whether it is useful for Kui Xiaoan's illness. The second thing is more serious, which is the old master's speculation on the current situation in the world. Nanyu surrendered to you and offered thousands of miles of territory to the Su family, which led to an imbalance in the situation. The Su family, who held the emperor hostage to control the princes, dominated the country. Dongyu only had the Liaxi army as its main force, which was unable to resist the Ziliang army in the west and the northern Qi in the north. The northern Qi had been conquering for a year. Although it had a large territory north of the Yellow River to replenish food and supplies, it could not lose the people's hearts in the name of restoring the country. It could only recruit but not rob. The family assets accumulated for 60 years could hardly support the northern Qi to continue crossing the Yellow River and heading south. In this situation, the old man speculated that the northern Qi and Dongyu would inevitably turn hostility into friendship, form an alliance with each other, and first attack the western Yu controlled by the Su family. With the powerful military force of the northern Qi and the wealth of Jiangnan, the Su family would have to pay a huge price to pacify the two countries. The old man could not reach Zhou Qingkai's hands, so he could not help and let Su Buling break the situation himself. Su Buling carefully read the envelope and gradually frowned. Song Yufu stood by, tiptoed to look, but unfortunately she couldn't see clearly, so she asked softly. Husband, what did Grandpa say? Is there any way? Yes, but I'm not sure. Su Buling handed the letter to Xiao Qi who was waiting by the side, and asked. Have the four kings of the east and northern Qi had any contact with each other recently? Xiao Qi took the envelope, read it carefully from beginning to end, and her face became a little serious. The surrender of Nanyu happened more than 10 days ago. The news may have only been passed to the four kings of the east and northern Qi not long ago. If Grandpa Yufu the speculation is true. Now it should be in the planning stage, and there is no formal contact. The alliance of both sides must find a way to stop it, but at this level of negotiation, The hidden stakes cannot be touched at all. Su Buling nodded thoughtfully, pondered for a long time, and looked at the flying snow outside the window. It's only in the spring that we cross the river to fight the four kings in the east, and there are still 2 or 3 months. Xiao Qi blinked. How are you going to deal with it? I'm going to take Xiaoan out to relax. Su Buling came to the desk, picked up the pen and ink, and started writing a letter on rice paper. The letter was obviously not a reply to the old man. After Xiao Qi tilted his head and looked at it carefully for a few times, he was slightly stunned, and then narrowed his eyes, showing a bit of cunning. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 790. The sky was bright and the snow that had been blowing for days gradually stopped, turning from heavy snow to light snow. On the snow on the shore, the horse chasing the wind was hitched to the carriage, pulling a small carriage. Chasing the wind is a horse that is only one in a million. It has gone through countless mountains of corpses and seas of blood. This is the first time that it has come to pull a cart. At this time, it is still a little dissatisfied. It lightly kicks the snow with its hooves and snorts from time to time. The carriage is not big, with a string of wind chimes hanging in the corner of the ceiling. From the outside, it looks like just a small carriage for ordinary merchants to ride on the road, but the decoration inside is very exquisite and comfortable. The carriage is specially nailed with cotton velvet and brocade to resist the cold winter wind. There are small couches and small cases. Everything is available, and there is even an iron pot hanging on the back of the carriage, which is compact but not cluttered. Xiao Xiang rarely got up early, took the quilt that Lu Hongluan had sewn by hand, and spread it in the carriage. Nightingale held the weapon, wrapped it in black cloth, and hung it under the carriage. On the building boat next to him, Su Buletinling spread his arms wide and asked Zhongli Jiju to help tie the soft armor. He also had a pair of black gloves on his hands. The gloves were ripped off from Shang Guanqinhe's body. The texture was unknown, and his defensive power was amazing. It is very warm to wear in winter. For safety reasons, the poison-quenching iron hooks on the fingertips have been removed. Ning Yuhi sat in front of him, folding Su Buling's clothes, with a bit of worry and reluctance in his eyes. Isn't it safe to go out alone? Why don't I follow you? Zhongli Jiju helped Su Buling tie his belt, shook his head and said. Miss Kui is withdrawn and doesn't like crowded places. My husband took her out for a ride. If I take you with me, what's the difference between it and being on a boat? Maybe it's better to be on the boat while you and your husband go out. I'm sure the heavens and the earth are all in chaos, let alone Miss Kui. It's good not to be embarrassed to death by your hungry appearance. Ning Yuhi's face darkened slightly. I'm serious, why are you talking nonsense? And who is so hungry? You don't even look at yourself. You screamed so loudly last night that Chu Chu even came and knocked on the door. After a few sentences, the bickering started again. Su Buling was already used to it, and he didn't favor anyone, he just said with a smile. I'm only taking Xiao Wan with me. There's no place I can't go. Just don't worry. I'll come back when Xiao Wan gets better. Seeing this, Ning Yuhi also gave up the idea of following and sighed softly. Grandpa Yufu said that there is a piece of agar wood in the northern Qi dynasty. Don't take it too seriously. Agar wood has the effect of calming the mind, but it can never cure all diseases. It's not like the emperor of the former Qi dynasty never died of illness. This time I went out, the main thing is to spend more time with Miss Kui to relax. Miss Kui is suffering from a heart disease. Sometimes a word you say to your heart is more effective than any panacea. Su Buling nodded, of course I know this. Zhongli Jiju actually felt uneasy in her heart. After thinking about it, she picked up the little sparrow that was eating pine nuts in the golden birdcage. Take Yi with you. It's always safer when you're out and about with someone prying for information. The little sparrow in the birdcage visibly froze for a moment. He turned his furry head and looked at the wind and snow on the river outside. Then he staggered and fell into the birdcage, with his little paws facing the sky and twitching slightly. He looked like he was going to die soon. Zhongli Jiju became angry when he saw it and glared. Don't pretend to be dead. Why are you, a bird, afraid of the cold? The hair on your body has grown white? Ningyu, he is not afraid of the cold even if he has no hair. Spit. When Ningyu he heard these unguarded words, his eyes were full of anger and shame, and he raised his hand and slapped Jiju's buttocks. The little sparrow lay still and chirped twice, obviously saying, she has no hair and no clothes, can it be the same? Su Buling was a little funny, but it was much more convenient to have a flying scout bird in front of him when he was out. He raised his hand to take Yi out of the birdcage and put it on his shoulder. Yi, don't make trouble. I'll just find you some clothes to wear later. The little sparrow was filled with lovelessness, knowing that he couldn't hide away, so he could only roll up listlessly and lay on Su Buling's shoulder. After a while, Su Buling took Kui Zioan out of the room behind the shipbuilding. Yi also has an extra red vest made when she married Jiju. Kui Zioan is still very weak, but after a few days of chatting with her, her spirit has improved a bit, and her cheeks are a little more shiny. At this time, he was wrapped in thick quilt, and was wrapped like a caterpillar, with only one cheek exposed. Because he was as thin as a willow, it felt like Su Buling hugging the bed quilt, and the little sparrow huddled in Kui Zioan's arms. Inside, Kui Zioan lay on Su Buling's arm, walked through the corridor, looked at the many girls seeing off on the deck, and asked slightly confused. Where are we going? Su Buling walked slowly and said calmly, where do you want to go? Kui Zioan blinked her eyes. She was used to taking things as they came. As long as Su Buling was around, she didn't seem to have anywhere she wanted to go, so she raised her lips and smiled. Let's talk about it when we get out. It doesn't matter where we go. Good. Su Buling walked out of the corridor and came to the deck. When the cold wind hit, Kui Zioan shrank back into the quilt again. Maybe she felt that there were too many people on the deck and was a little embarrassed to be hugged in public. In the end, she simply buried her face in it. Said in a muffled voice. Mother, won't you go out together? Xiao Xiang'er's red dress fluttered in the wind, standing on the edge of the deck, with a complicated look in her eyes. I'm afraid of the cold. Just go out and walk around. As he spoke, he looked at Su Buling, hesitated, and said softly. Su Buletinling, you work harder. These words obviously told Su Buling to deal with Kui Zioan quickly. It is better for mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to sleep together than for Zioan to be seriously ill. Su Buling naturally understood what Mr. Bao Bao meant, lowered his head and tapped Xiang'er's lips. Don't worry. It should be spring when we get back. Then we can go out together and bring everyone with us. Xiao Qi stood in front of Xiang'er, glanced at the north, and said seriously. There's no need to be anxious, just take your time and stroll around. I'm enough with you on the ship. You don't need to worry about military matters. Even if you come back later, it won't affect the overall situation. The main thing is to spend time with Zioan. Su Buling nodded, thank you for your hard work, madam. Xiao Qi pursed her lips, turned her head and looked away, and snorted a little arrogantly. Lu Hongluan and Song Yufo stood together. Both of them must have been reluctant to let Su Buling leave, but there was a whole family on the boat. They were not worried about Zioan's illness, so they just said goodbye silently. I prayed for the stars and the moon until Su Buling came back. She had never even gone shopping once, and suddenly had to leave for a long time. She must have felt aggrieved. After all, Shuchu and Qingyi had just gone out for a swim, and she had been fishing on the boat for a long time. What a bastard! But at this time, you can't pester Su Buling to go with you. Zhu Manzi hesitated for a long time, but still said with a smile. Mr. Su, remember to bring me some local specialties. If you go to South Vietnam, forget about it. I heard King Yi say that there is a particularly unpleasant rice noodle there. I want to see what it looks like. Okay, I will definitely not forget this time. How about I bring you a roasted camel? Zhongli Chuchu didn't want to interrupt at first, but when she heard this, she was stunned and said quickly. Ms. Sir, please don't roast my white camel. Ning Qingyi was bullied so much by Su Buling that she didn't dare to follow him this time. After hearing this, she said seriously. Chu Chu, your white camel should be in Jiangnan now. Besides, he can't be brought back even if he's roasted. It's just a joke to deceive Manzi. Su Buling chuckled, no longer reluctant to say goodbye, and said. It's too cold outside, please go inside. It's not the first time I've been out. Song Yufa pursed her lips and bowed slightly. My husband has a good trip. Grandpa has great magical powers. Since I told my husband, it will definitely be useful. Lu Hongluan also nodded softly and said softly, can you come back sooner or later? Yunu and Xiaoyi are going crazy with anxiety. I originally wanted you to take them into the room when you come back this time. Ah, miss, you. Yunu, who was standing behind, turned red, and Xiaoyi's eyes lit up. Nightingale crossed her arms across her chest to feel confident, while Yufu's silly maid Daodu lowered her head shyly, not knowing why she was so shy. Su Buling was reluctant to part with him, but he had to go early to come back early. He turned around and stepped off the pedal, putting Kui Zioan, who was wrapped in quilts, on the carriage. Drive. After a soft drink, the wheels pressed over the snow and moved slowly along the riverside. Su Buling was sitting outside the carriage, holding the reins in his hand. He looked back at the girls at the edge of the deck, raised his hand and waved, and then lightly twitched the horse. The horse neighed, and the carriage drew a thin line in the snowy sky, galloping towards the north.